there's a lot that you said, Amanda, when we went into the first one with the colored door at the train depot. But I think it's kind of, time has passed since then. That show's come and gone. We're moving through this project. You're, kind of really ramping up with Pipeline. So, what of your expectations, or what were your expectations coming into this project, coming to these two productions, and how have you felt that they've been met or changed, or how have they evolved over time as you've been kind of coming through the actual experience of preparing for these two characters and portraying these two characters?
I think because I didn't have a great frame of reference of either show coming in, I was pretty much just a blank slate of, okay, there are two stories about two very different types of women, and I want to tell these stories. And so it was really just taking them show at a time, and really, because I knew nothing about Anna Mac Clark, that was kind of, that was extraordinary, learning about her and what she did, and the time frame that she did it in, the time period she did it in. And so it was more so about her story being told. I think that was what I wanted. My expectation was I wanted this story to be told. And I wanted people to come in, because I knew not everyone, but the majority of people coming in were not going to know the show or her.
Sure.
So it was exciting for me to be able to have people come up to me after the show and say, I had no idea about this. I'm going to go look her up. I'm going to go read about this. And are there more? And I was like, I'm sure there are. We got to uncover them. So that was I was very proud of that. Coming into Pipeline, I kind of found out I was doing Pipeline right as showing up for Color Door. So I knew I was going to have to shift gears. I didn't realize I was going to have to get in another car when you did Pipeline. I thought, okay, I could just shift this, No, it was a whole other vehicle that Pipeline was. But and I had heard some of Dominique before, but when I read it, I was like, whoa. That's what I audibly said after I read it, was just whoa. And that one I knew I was going to have to step completely back off of and not even try to, because that experience, while is very familiar to me, ancillary speaking from people around me, trying to find myself in that was much more difficult. I could find more in Anna, because that was a little bit more of a trajectory that I was familiar with. Naya is a completely different type of person, but it was a great challenge for me, because it forced me to have to confront some things. I took pieces of conversations that I've had with people who I've known in a Naya-like position, whether they're divorced, single mother, teacher, and tried to bring that in and really convey this story in the same way. And then just they're written in different ways, so you adjust in that. So it was and it was another great story that I wanted to help tell. So I was very fortunate, very blessed in that way, that these two shows are being back bookend like this to tell this experience. So that was kind of what I thought going in both of those.
So that's kind of interesting that it's the kind of historical narrative, right? The one that took place in a different place, a different time, a time in which there was a completely different reality for women. And it's not the same reality that women, ostensibly should have at this point, in terms of access, in terms of equity, in terms of voice. And yet you related very much to that particular character, to Anna Mac Clark, right? So let's kind of think about that. What was it about Anna? What was it about her, kinds of how she responded to the pressures in her life, that resonated with you?
Can you, when you say how... In terms of the pressures in her, so think about it, right? Like she was this young woman. Yes.
And she was living in a world that told her how it is, right?
Yep.
And she had a very different idea about that. I can't tell the difference between you and Anna in terms of Amanda and Anna. That energy comes out of you, right? I can't imagine being anywhere within 100 feet of you telling you how it is. I would feel the frying pan in my head fairly quickly, right? So the idea being, she lived in this very different time in which you're supposed to be quiet about being told how it is as a woman, and especially as a woman of color, right? Mm-hmm. But then we had these discussions around the idea that that historical narrative, though it occurred, like 80, 90 years ago, right? Like, it's still so relevant to women right now. Of course. And that's kind of awful, right? Like, we're in 2019 here, right? We're supposed to have been woke and changed and awareness building. And what did they say after 2008, after Obama's election? We're in a post-racial society, right? Like, that changed very quickly within 8 years' time. So that's what I'm thinking is you kind of, in kind of differentiating between approaching Naya and approaching Anna, that you found your way into Anna easier, right? So how did you do that? How did you connect with that particular character's experience in terms of your own?
I think the reason or the way that I connected with Anna as much as I had is because I was very aware of, I don't want to call them expectations, but obviously expectations of what Black women in America are, what we're supposed to project and what we're supposed to attain and accomplish. And it was very different in that time, and it's very different now, but the expectation is still the same. And there's that familial expectation of you gotta, it's better than what you had and where you came from and that. And that was obviously preached in my household. Obviously, I'm anecdotal, but I have many anecdotes of friends who had the same sort of expectation of, it's education, it's, but don't try to rock the boat too much. Obviously it wasn't said in those types of terms, but it's like you do play by rules, do this, X, Y, Z, A, B, C, and then you'll be good. Yeah. That's the familial side of it. That's the internal, that's the inside. And then I was fortunate in that I wasn't too pressured externally. I took those on as I got older because obviously as an adult, that's just what you do. You look at what else people are doing and how they're moving and how they're attaining and growing and stuff like that. And so I took those on for me. But with the Anna connection, I think it's human nature that when you see something wrong, you want to do it right. And when you don't understand why, you're not seen the same way and valued, and you want to change that because you are. And so I relate to that. Especially doing the acting here in town, and that was what I loved about community theater. When I went to see shows, I saw people who looked like me. That's what, when I do the films and all that, they looked like me and they were telling those stories. I wanted to be able to do the same thing. And I think Anna was looking around, and she probably knew people and knew herself and knew others, and she in this Negro school and college and educated. It's like, we can do this. Let's do this. And so I took to that because I realized it was like a check for me on myself. Like, hey, I need to be, I could be pushing a little bit more in some areas where I'm seeing things that I could change, or I could at least talk about changing, and at least let's get the conversations going about it. And so that's what really drew me to her. She had a lot of bravery. I don't have that kind of thing either. So there were things that she possessed that I didn't, that I also was drawn to as well. I hope that kind
could have fooled us. Yeah.
But, that's right. But is that kind of in the ballpark?
That's 100% in the ballpark. In fact, that's such a beautiful expression because, knowing our consulting scholar for this project, Ann Kinnebrew, like that's, I can imagine that whole narrative resonates very much with you, right? Like the idea of this particular space, especially being drawn into a theater space, right? Being able to portray change in a way that isn't really thrust upon people, but it's kind of done in a way that they can accept. It's a safe space, right? So was your draw to this project similar to that, Anne? In the sense of being able to take issues that, especially at the intersection of race and gender, have been, at least from where I'm sitting, presumed to have changed, but I don't know. Like, were you drawn to this project because you also saw that idea that, well, things really haven't changed, even from this very historical perspective, this historical drama, this historical narrative, to now. Did you feel like that play when you first read it? And again, we'll just say it's Nancy Gall Clayton's, play, and we had a really good podcast with her. But did you see the relevance right away to contemporary application?
I guess when I take on projects, I really try to I look at myself in the project, and it's like, here I'm in this project about the American Black experience, and I'm white. So how can I relate to that? How can I be in this experience, and how can I open that up? And to me, the American Black experience for me is I have to open that up to the white race in a way. I have to find a way for all of us into that. And we certainly, as a white person, I certainly have, however dubious, I guess, I'm constantly dealing with my privilege. And when I read the play, that's what smacked me in the face, is white privilege. All over that, in a historical sense. But it was strange because it was during World War II.
Yeah.
And of course, it's there, but you don't. World War II, in my mind, took over that. You don't think about race relations, and of course it was there, but from my perspective, it was all about, getting the Nazis.
Yeah.
But this brought to my mind how and I knew about the Tuskegee Airmen and the big players in that, the big black players in that. But this was really, I never understood, the place of black women in that. I barely understood the place of women in that. So from my perspective, it was a real eye-opener of broadening that whole perspective of a historical idea of World War II, of race, of the role of women, in a very, for me, personal story is everything. This is a personal story.
Did it hit you in terms of a way in, not only thinking about it for yourself, but a way in for others, especially relative to, okay, this whole kind of theater function that we were approaching this project through had to have its expression in community engagement, kind of scaffolded around and following through and whatnot. So the idea of helping people to find their way into this particular story, how much did the intersection of the identity development of a woman in this particular story of Anna Mac Clark, and you can't really separate it out. It's kind of like soup, right? You can't unmake soup. The ingredients are all mixed together, but there was her singular experience, even as I recall the way that the narrative was portrayed, and even certain aspects, Amanda, of the portrayals that you made, there were, even in kind of nonverbal spaces, right? Like with the colonel, like that particular scene, there was such a dynamic that was more about a gender disparity than it was necessarily about a race disparity, even though the actual script, the words that were being portrayed there were much more about the race disparity that was being discussed. But just the way the staging occurred, the position that occurred, it was very much about a woman's stance, empowerment, acquiescence, disempowerment, whatever the case was. So was that a strong theme for you, Anne, in terms of thinking about that, or did it really come through more in the space of kind of dismantling privilege, or an understanding of privilege? And then again, privilege could be about gender too, right? Like it was that as well.
I mean, as a woman, I'm attuned to that all the time.
Yeah.
But I think so. To me, what spoke louder was the racial.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that was my own ear or if it was really what the script was saying. But in my mind, the script spoke louder to that for me than it did on the gender issue.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about either of those two disparities, either of those two issues, it almost became, it didn't matter, it was the same result.
Yeah.
In the sense of whatever this woman's story, she was diminished on every front.
Yeah.
And she was incredibly capable, incredibly smart, and she had gone through so much to get there. And all of that was thrown to the wayside. Yet, look at what she accomplished, and at that young age.
At that time.
Just to have that presence of mind to keep moving with all of that was very impactful to me.
Yeah.
And I guess I see that as a very different character as what we see in Naya.
So, Amanda, let's think about that. First coming off the kind of nuance that you had to find to really portray Anna in the beautiful way that you did. This idea of, you said it, right? I don't know if I believe it. I don't know you well, but this idea that, well, I'm not this, she's that, and you're mentioning bravery. But as Anna also mentioned, there was a strength and a persistence through circumstances that, were cringeworthy for me, being behind a camera, recording aspects of this, portrayal. Where did you connect with for yourself to find that strength, in order to portray that strength, rather, of maintaining a certain understanding of your own identity, or of the character's identity, through very damaging moments, right? Even when there was a subordinate in a military circumstance that was, I couldn't even believe that occurred. Like when I first saw that scene, that just relative to race, that somehow trumped the military hierarchy in that particular space between lieutenant and private, right? So where did you connect with that kind of strength on your own? What did you pull from in your own experience to kind of find that, like, this is what's going to take me through this moment. I'm going to be able to shoulder this burden.
The timing was really remarkable because I had just come back from DC when we started rehearsals. And so I had visited the AfricanAmerican History and Culture Museum.
Wow. Okay. And
so going through all of that I'm glad that I was able to do that. They have a really wonderful section of African-American involvement, and first in the military, and actually saw the campaign poster, and they have Medal of Honor honorees on there. So that was all really inspiring, encouraging. I hadn't really heard of any of the people in the exhibit, so that was really wonderful, and I took a lot of that with me. Everyone who I had known who had been there says it's transformative, and I always thought, sure, it is. It really is. It's gorgeous and beautiful and exhausting and emotional place, but so I was taking a lot of that. I tried to, unfortunately my parents were very adamant about, you read about history, you know who people are, you know what they did. And so I had to go back to some of those stories from that era, from civil rights, coming out of Jim Crow into that. And really, they had a makeshift Greensboro lunch counter. So you can see that and that experience. And there's a huge monitor, and it has everyone's mugshot from protesters who were arrested for just sitting at the lunch counter. And so it was about, and then the juxtaposition of, now here I am sitting at a counter, a makeshift counter of that, and I've got Asian people to the left of me, white people to the right of me, and we're all watching this. And so that reinforced the idea that this needs to be told. Her story needs to be told. And so pulling on that strength was from all of the strength that I saw from all of that around me in that place. And then when I was talking to my mom, who was raised and born in that, and she just sat there and shook her head, that's all she could say. There's really nothing else to really articulate about it. It's just, you just shake your head that this is, and that's not 100 years ago. That's 75 years ago. You know, we're not that far removed
within a lifetime.
from that. And so that's where I pulled my strength from seeing the people that I'd read about who've done it, folks in my life who've done it, maybe not on as grand a scale, but anyone who knows the history of Alachua County and how desegregation happened here and how integration happened here with closing schools on that side and busing onto this side and that whole thing. That's where I drew it from. For me, you know, it was just really about, because it wasn't something that was maybe as foreign as it might be to Caucasian individual. There was a little bit more of a grounded reality in it, because I have relatives who came from it, and then it's just something that we just know it.
So in the sense that this becomes something, I mean, take a story that has happened in a different time, in a different place, and you bring it home to a place where it's very relevant. I mean, you tie it to that. You serve this community through it. In doing so, and now at least we have the ability, at least with this first part of this American Black Experience Project, with the Colored Door production, how did you feel that your portrayal of Anna's narrative, the entire experience, was received by the community? What kind of reflection did you get from community members, whether family, whether friends, whether strangers, whatever it may be?
It's it's funny because I had a couple of my coworkers come to the show, and they didn't know I had this whole other life.
Oh, wonderful!
After 5 o'clock, and so
your after hours life, right?
It is always very, very.
What does Amanda do for fun? Oh, social justice. I see. That's your thing.
Acting, and then you tie the social justice component into it. But from church family who've come to see it, and coworkers who've come to see it, and my family who've come to see it, they all were extremely. They all just came. They just walked away from it just like, I didn't know about her. It was I didn't know about her, and that's great, but then again, is it really great? I mean, it's great that we were able, that there is a space, as you were speaking on, Siraj, that story can be told, and that is why this is so needed in communities. But it was just, they were like, it was good, but I didn't know her, and I'm just so glad I know something now that I can go up and, because people are, I call it the hidden figure effect. And everyone went to see that, and everyone was blown away by, Catherine is still alive. She's like in her 90s, but this isn't some woman who did this and then died. Like, she's still alive. You can read her interviews right now. So it's just, I think people, because our part of the American story is so diminished and downplayed, and in some instances erased, it becomes, I wouldn't say it's that much harder, but it's that much more necessary for it to be told. And so having people come in and say, I didn't know her, and then walking out knowing her, that's, to me, that was it. That's all I wanted people to do. You come in not knowing, you walk out knowing. You might not know, you might not remember her birthday, you might not remember that, but you remember her name and you remember what she did. And we took one step to rewriting what had been erased. And that's what was crucial for me. And that was what was most rewarding for me. Performance, whatever that, I'm grateful if it went well and it looked good, but I didn't know her. I can't believe I didn't know her, but that's what was the most rewarding, and that's what I've heard from everyone. And I even had, people from some ladies from my church. There was a whole class of ladies who actually came, and they were like, we're gonna go look her up right now, and we're gonna try to find more. And it just, it started something. It rolled the snowball, and that's what you want,
It was definitely a catalyst.
It was, very much so.
Because that's what I reflected on for myself. The way that I kind of connected with that, I didn't know her, and that hidden figure idea. I love that hidden figure effect you're talking about. But it was a different kind of thing. It was a question. It was like, why didn't I know her? Right? Why didn't I know about this? Which is weird, because I know much about the way, this particular aspect of American history, this American Black experience, has been portrayed, but it's been portrayed perhaps, what that made me reflect on, and I get kind of down the rabbit hole with these kind of things, is what I know, what I've been allowed to know, right? Is there more to know? And why wasn't this known? Because this happened a good, quarter century before civil rights really took hold in this country. It actually happened at a time where Indian civil rights was kind of, with British colonialism and whatnot, that was kind of at play, and yet it was happening here too, and it was happening in such a powerful way. So you're right, that's important, and I think this idea of bringing it into a community ritual of remembrance, that's something that I really felt was a powerful effect of your portrayal in The Colored Door. So now, you mentioned yourself. Following that, you didn't really just switch gears; you switched vehicles, right? So get into that a little bit more. From Anna to Naya, what did it mean to switch vehicles? Were you going from a pickup truck to a Maserati? What were we talking about here in terms of the vehicle switch? Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much.
So what was that for you in terms of the switch?
The switch was. I'm still, we did the whole run through last night, and I just running the whole thing. It was just like, whoa, Dominique done let up. But in switching the vehicles, I haven't figured out which vehicle is which yet. Naya's definitely had a little bit more baggage and space for a whole lot more stuff to be thrown on top of it. And so, the intersectionality of so much that happens in that show, mother, son, ex-wife, ex-husband, father, son, paramour and co-worker and the son's girlfriend and mom, and the girlfriend and the boyfriend. So it was, and those were much earthier and meatier than kind of the interactions in Colored Door, where it was more of the historical kind of, this is what happened. And in this show, it really digs into what is at the root. And I don't think we ever get to the root. I think we see something, and I think it's on the audience to kind of get to the root. We're not telling you. That's what I was initially taking from it, which I like. I didn't want to preach at people and, make it this whole thing about, this is what we got to do and all that. No. I like that it's ambiguous. I like that it doesn't really pick a hero and a villain. It, it's this system and this construct. Is that the villain? Is the choices, what, and so that was a whole other kind of thing to deal with. So now you're going from, shift to automatic and heated seats and GPS and back up and look in the monitor and see that whole thing. So, but it's still the same struggle though. Yeah. Which is the remarkable thing. You take these two women from these two different places, rural Kentucky, any inner city America, USA, but it's still this struggle of you want the best for your life, but you've got all these kind of things that are stacked up against you. And how do you overcome these hurdles and not stop and when you fall and not stay there? And how do you keep yourself together and then your family's all right and the community being okay? And who can you trust? Who's got your back? Who's going to be trying to hold you back and stop you? Is it going to be the husband that you're battling with? Is it your son who wants to grow? And it's a whole bunch of different things. But
so who do you think, as you reflect on finding your way into Anna, as you reflect on finding your way into Naya, which character has a more kind of attuned awareness of the struggles or the barriers or what is stacked up, as you said, in terms of all the cultural expectations around being a woman of color in each specific point in time and in life that these individuals find themselves? Who's more aware of that? Was it Anna that was more aware of what was stacked against her, or is Naya more aware of that? Who has a harder time finding their way through that kind of awareness, navigating it, learning about it?
I think they both do. I just think that Pipeline probably explores it more.
Sure.
Anna's is left up to what you kind of know happened when she traveled to all those places when she was getting her training, and she has the line where she says, I've encountered segregation in Kentucky in every place the Army Corps sent me. And with Anna, she's teaching in a school where she has a class of Omaris, I call them, her son, examples of them just like them. And Dune has this great monologue in scene 8 of Pipeline where he's like, you know, the battles here are as old as the bricks in this building. You know, there's history, there's legacy in that. So what Anna had to endure, the ripples of that is what Naya is dealing with now.
Wow.
You know? And so I think they both have these, they're both, I think, overcoming the same type of mountain, that the mountains just change shape.
But I think too, Naya has personal wounds that she has to overcome.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely.
Anna hasn't had time to
yes,
accrue.
they haven't, exactly.
Well, it's life experience.
Life experience, absolutely.
And I think you, as an actor, you have to be able to layer that in. So it makes it a different performance.
It does, definitely, absolutely.
So you're also a poet in the way that you express yourself now. I like this poetic expression of how you.
It's so poetic and lyrical. I love that too. I love that. I love
Props to Dominique Morisseau, right?
Absolutely.
Like that's well done. Well, I like that though, especially, and I think that was your kind of expression, this idea that what Anna's experience was, the ripples of that experience are being felt by Naya in this particular portrayal, right? So as an actor, you're carrying that forward. So, Anne, in terms of how these two productions, these two narratives are juxtaposed, how we're meant to, I guess that's our job, right? To tie that big red thread across all of the experience of this American Black experience, which, for full disclosure's sake, to whoever's listening to this, neither Anne or I live the American Black experience, right? No. So we don't actually do that, but that's our job at this point. So thank you for every potential lesson that we're going to take away from this, Amanda, because we need that, right?
Oh,
so
let me refer you to
let me. Well, no, we've been getting that from the community as well, but
yes, I'm sure.
I mean, that's why we do the work.
Exactly.
So we can be the.
We're just the vehicles, right?
Absolutely.
I'm the truck, Anne's the
allies.
Allies, indeed. But in terms of that connection between the two productions, the two stories, the two narratives, how does that work for you in terms of the ripples of one experience, of one character, building into the effects that come out of this very contemporary exploration of everything, of lack of access, lack of equity, lack of, kind of cultural representation, whatever the case is, that occurs in Pipeline? Do you think one feeds well into the other? Has that been working? Has that, have we...
I'm a big believer in cultural wounds. A big believer in any, the fact that what we're seeing today are a result of what happened 400 years ago. And the fact that we can't necessarily surgically close those wounds in any way, shape, or form. And we will reap and be bled all over for that. For, time in memoriam, all we can do is try to figure out the best way to live together. And, I don't have the answers. Like I said just a minute ago, the best thing I can do is try to understand and stand alongside and, be there in whatever is needed. And I'm not sure anybody knows all of that at some point, but I don't think we can ever forget. I think that's the first thing, is we just can't forget. And, I'm sorry isn't going to be good enough. But that being said, the fact that we're still standing and standing together has to be
marked.
Something. It has to be marked. And so doing some sort of program like this, I think is important, and I think it's important to invite everybody in, because it's not just, our African-American neighbors that have suffered this. It's our Indian neighbors. It's our it's our American Indian, Native American Indian neighbors. It's which is a terrible thing to say. I should Native American neighbors. You know, it's Chinese American neighbors. We all have suffered many different, it's women, whatever. But it's being open. It's, you know, realizing, to me, it's all about human rights. We have to be able to see that in every instance. And I think that's what we've forgotten very much lately in this country. So when there's an opportunity to come up that we are looking at human rights, you know, we need to take that opportunity. And this was a great opportunity to really look at some of those historical wounds in a historical way. I mean, I've had the privilege of working on 2 projects that were about Black history in the last couple of years, and I do it because I need to learn. I love learning about little known. I don't even know everything about my own history. So any time I can do that, I relish the idea, and that's a lot of why I do theater, is to learn these stories. But the ripple effects will always be there. I don't think we can ever not look at that. These, you know, I think what Amanda said is very wise, that they definitely tie into each other.
Yeah. You know, this, both of what you said, I mean, it reminds me of something that in a different context, you know, one of our friends and colleagues in this community who's doing a lot of really good work, Jody Polk, you know, she works with the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building and Restorative Justice, right? So it's this idea of, especially with incarcerated women, and that's disproportionately incarcerated women of color, and when they re-enter society, the idea that there are, you know, there's mechanisms in place that on the surface purport this idea of, now you're coming back in, go do this, go do that, this is how you can go do it, this is how you can go do whatever it is, you know, the world is yours to go claim and whatnot. And yet there's something important about how Jody reflects on that particular expression that always stuck with me. It was in a prior podcast we did, you know, for another project some months back. It's this idea that whatever is being done through these restorative measures that are being taken, they still don't depart from the idea of whose agency and privilege it is to define these restorative measures, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea that what is it that you want? What is it that you want as an individual who may have been incarcerated, who may be coming through this experience? How do you perceive your opportunity? What is it that you perceive as your opportunity, and what is it that you want to do? You know, and that agency isn't necessarily, no one's asking that question, right? So I wonder, Amanda, in terms of how you said, I mean, some of what you said reflects what the director, Brad Hicks, has said about this play that also stuck with me, is that it asks questions, it doesn't seek to answer them, right? So do you feel in any way that your portrayal of Naya, what Pipeline is doing, how this production is kind of shifting the consciousness of this community, is it doing anything in any way connected to what Jody has suggested, right? Like, are the people who are actually being impacted by marginalization, by, you know, any kind of disenfranchising kind of effect, like, is it giving voice to those individuals, or is it still somebody else who's, you know, as we talked about with Anna, right? Like, we didn't know about her because somebody else told that story, and we didn't hear about her. We heard about Rosa Parks, you know, we didn't hear about Anna Mac Clark, which for me, no offense to Rosa Parks, that story was profoundly impactful at a time where there wasn't even anybody else doing that, you know, and that was, I couldn't even believe that, much less, you know, like it being a person of color, that it was a woman of color that took that particular stance. So are we able to receive a different kind of voice through Pipeline? Are we getting that, I wonder?
I read an interview Dominique did where she said she was reading The New Jim Crow.
Ooh.
And that kind of was what sparked her on her journey to write Pipeline. And so I was, I tried to get it, haven't gotten it yet, but I'm still going to read it even afterwards. You do? I need it, because I read the first chapter of it, or like the first part of it, and I was blown away, because it is. It is exactly like the new Jim Crow is criminal, you know? And so I think this, as much as it does speak to restorative rights, as you have laid out quite eloquently, by the way, I think it speaks to that, maybe not as directly, but indirectly, because it's obviously a fate that he's facing. That is a real dilemma, and that's what's driving a lot of Naya's panic, I believe, and a lot of her dismay and her just all out just her overall mania about what's happening is because she, I'm sure, I would perceive that she's read that. And so she probably had the same kind of visceral reaction to it. She teaches kids who 50% of them 80% of them are going to wind up in the pipeline if they're not already down the chute, as you know, right away anyway. So I think that realization, I think that's what's kind of driving that, because in the back of her mind, that's all she kind of sees, you know, it's just one viral video moment away from that sort of happening. And another, as I've been reading the show, and not to kind of deviate from the restorative part, but I also appreciate the idea, and I don't know, I'll have to converse with the cast, and maybe we could touch on it if we all sit down together.
100%.
This idea of mental health in the Black community.
Yes.
And that is a huge elephant that is ignored and swept away, and we have, as a community, I believe we have really got to come to terms with that, because we are reckoning with the consequences of mental health and untreated mental health and trauma and
misunderstood,
being misunderstood,
like
totally misunderstood. And so I'm hoping that element of it people will take away from it as well, because the mania and the up and down and the in and out, that is not unique to women, Black people, young people, teachers, whomever. That is a human experience. And so as much as I want non-African American audiences to come away with an understanding of this is real, this isn't something imaginary that we're making up, this is a real life crisis that we deal with, but then the other things that compound on top of that, and how much mental health is driving a lot of this mania about it, and how we deal with that too. And that was one of those questions that I think is posed but not directly answered, or you know, it's something that kind of is in the background that I hope people will kind of grasp onto as something as well. So
and support the mental health for children.
Mental health for children. There's a big, you know, Lori has that monologue about another student ruined by Ritalin, you know, not to get into that kind of conversation, but I mean, that's a pipeline option. You know, we have metal detectors. What are they supposed to do? We got the resource officers. What are they doing? We have to medicate them to sit still. It's just like so much.
And that's not the only pipeline. We've got foster care
pipelines. We've got broken family pipelines, abuse pipelines. It's just, she said mental health. That's a line in there, and I just, you know, I hope that resonates with it too, because that's a large part.
Well, I mean, from your lips to the consulting scholar's ears, I think we can shape this kind of thing, because in this community we have been, I mean, there are proponents and advocates for restorative justice. There are proponents and advocates, especially, you know, one of the leadership at NAMI Gainesville, you know, who is actually doing a lot relative to the mental health of African Americans and in this community, and broadly, you know, much larger, which is then, who is it who's doing this? I don't know. I forget. Yeah, I'm not sure who it is. I think I mean, I don't want to go all into that, but it's the main actor in the show Empire. Taraji P. Henson, right? Yeah. So that, in a similar kind of smaller community space is happening here as well, and maybe we can get these individuals together for another sit down in this capacity, because I think your experience is kind of a nexus as portraying this particular character, right? It's a beautiful character to. I mean, you are the intersection of all of this, you know, of all of this discussion. So again, no pressure, right? So that'll fall on your shoulders. But here's something that, Anna and I were talking about this the other day, and it was really of interest to me because and I think you would know this best in the sense of you're finding your way into Naya and portraying all the nuances of the stresses that she feels, the stresses she feels. She's a mother, she's an educator. And in that capacity, her son, Omari represents two different aspects of that continuum in terms of how she thinks about him, how she thinks about herself in response to him. So what are the tensions, I wonder, that Naya feels between her decision-making as a mother and the stressors that she feels in that capacity and her philosophies and beliefs as an educator relative to all these other kids that she's making a decision here with her own son based, and it is fear-based in very many capacities. And then especially this kind of resonates with me because I've seen the scene where her internal kind of conflict is coming out, and that scene between you and or between Naya and Omari that's happening. So how does she reconcile that? How have you found your way into understanding that kind of tension that she may or may not feel between those two aspects of her identity?
There's another scene that I think, I don't know how much I can get into.
No, I know, yeah.
There is another scene that after Omari's character has run away and come home.
Yeah.
And this is the first time Naya is seeing him since learning about his altercation with his teacher.
Wow.
And so that dialogue is just so, Dominique is just, she's amazing.
Wow.
And she has woven it to directly address the tension of every time Omari is telling her, he's asking me about Native Son, what did I think about Bigger Thomas? He's calling me Bigger Thomas.
Wow.
Naya has to come back and be like, he's your teacher. This is education. This is what this is supposed to be. And so it traverses a lot in a short amount of space, but it deals directly with her tension in that. And so when Bradley, was kind of coaching us through that, he talked a lot about how she's going to have to defend the teacher, but also have to not acknowledge, but acknowledge that this teacher did call her son Bigger Thomas.
Oh, man.
And so that was it. That's the toughest scene in the show to me, because she basically has to fall on the sword as a teacher and tell her son that you got to overlook this teacher stereotyping you at this fancy private hoity-toity school and asking you what you think about Bigger Thomas. Maybe not about the parents of the young lady he killed, any other perspective, but the murderer, and ask about his perspective on that. So I don't want to give away what happens in the scene, but it addresses that tension directly. I didn't even kind of think of it when I was reading it. I was kind of thinking it as, just being parental and why you can't just follow but Bradley then brought out about that. Well, she's a teacher too. Yeah. And so her defense of it isn't because she's trying to just reprimand him about you're going to get in trouble, but it's really her that is her instinctive protection of him, to try to just be like, we can't get into what it is, but at the same time, she can't also say, I know, I get it, I got you, I know he did. She can't do that either. And that's obviously that tears her apart. And I think that's driving the mania too. So,
how did you feel relative to your own experience? Reflecting on that kind of tension, have you found yourself in your own life kind of, and let us know. I forget exactly, unfortunately, what this came up with Nancy Gall Clayton. Like, she had this expression, right, about when she researched the family of Anna Mac Clark, and she was doing interviews and whatnot with people. There was what was the term? There are two names, right? Like individuals carry two names and kind of which represent two different identities. And Stephen, the artistic director of the Actors Warehouse, he responded to that as well.
If you called the one familiar name that's familiar to the family you're in. Yeah. If you called the other name, then you're out.
Yeah. So it was basically
the idea of having two different
this is your identity amongst your people and amongst your family, and this is the identity that you have in the world. And even for me, there's kind of walking with the identity of a person of color. There's definitely my white voice and what I carry forward and at work and this and that, and then however else I may,
Identity. It's in different spaces.
So in that sense, was there any kind of your own personal awareness of that kind of disparity or that kind of a fragmentation of your own identity that you've experienced in your life that fed into the tension that Naya had to experience in terms of, well, this is my one identity as an educator, and I have to kind of portray myself in one way for my son's sake, and then there's this almost indignation I feel as to what is being done, relative to this particular space that he's being made to occupy. He's already being stigmatized in this way, and that tension is very profound, right? So how did you find your way into kind of bringing up that emotion in that? Was there anything that you drew on in your own experience that, even in a small way could have fed into that kind of understanding?
Honestly, not really.
Yeah.
And I've been very fortunate in that way, but I've had friends who have had that story and have had that experience. And, the dualism of that they have to portray and how if they've maybe made a mistake and then that identity is attached on to that as well, and then having to overcome something else. So we won't go down that road
those are a lot of
it's a lot onto that. But I think the way I had to work my way through it and navigate through that is just that scene is kind of obviously the interaction with them, Naya and Omari, once he returns after running away, is what sort of precipitates what happens to her later on when she has her absolute mental break. And so I used that to work up to that, and so that was the way I kind of that was what I was using, because his break is that scene, her break comes 2 scenes later. And so I start that because Naya, Dominique says that she's hanging on by a thread. That's kind of her. You want to say who is Naya? She's hanging on by a thread. And I think that's something a human experience. We all may have something traumatic that happens, and we got to put out that identity. I'm fine. I'm good. Doing great. Hanging on. Doing all right. And so she does a lot of that, and then the scene that you've seen with her in the classroom with, he's just this constant kind of drumbeat in her head, what's going to happen, what's going to happen, what's going to happen. I'm using all of that. Dominique it's wonderful when you have that kind of writer who's able to give you enough of that to kind of, if you might not have that personal experience to draw from on that, she's laid it out so clearly that you can start to work your way through it emotionally for the
That's
purpose of telling
hallmark
the show.
of that playwright. She has a rhythm, and she is very lyrical.
It's a rhythm,
She's very good.
Incredibly lyrical on that, and so
she does it in 90 minutes.
It's amazing. What a tight show.
She probably is a Maserati, because
she's the Maserati.
She doesn't take her foot off the gas. You don't hit the gas until she doesn't let off until
every word
lights out. I mean, does every beat, and there's she purposely writes in moments where stuff isn't said. And so that's what I've had the most fun, I think, with trying to find in those moments, because the characters say so much. It can almost seem kind of wordy almost, so they're oversaying things, but she's built in specific moments of a look that can say a whole lot. And finding those moments have just been a real joy and work for me personally in working through that.
And she's also an educator.
And she's an educator as well.
So I think that played a lot into understanding the tension of being a parent and an educator. I don't know if she's a parent. I know she's an educator.
Sure. Wow. Well, you can definitely do those looks well. I've come to see that.
Well, I might have gotten a couple of those a time or two.
Yeah, exactly.
I might have pulled from mom on some of those.
You have some personal experience with that, right? Okay, so let's do this to kind of round out this beautiful expression that we've had, this exchange. The idea of how, and we obviously have the benefit of hindsight, how people came away, and you saw their reactions coming away from the experience of the colored door at the train depot, right? That's there. But in terms of setting an intention, as we're about to go into the show opening of Pipeline, right, which everybody needs to come to and don't miss, and so on, so on and so forth, yep. But the idea is, if you have an intention, personal intention, for what people you would like them to kind of come away with, even if it's just an expression, if it's an emotion, if it's a question, whatever it may be, what might that be? What would you like to have happen through this, the magic of theater? Yeah. Never easy, I know. You'll get used to it, podcast after podcast. Well,
it's so crazy because you rehearse and you rehearse and you rehearse and there's no one out there. And you rehearse and you rehearse and there's no one out there. And then when you finally get a house, they're gonna laugh at a line that you never thought was funny. They're gonna gasp at a moment that you thought was just a regular thing. They're going to be stunned in silence after something that you thought they might have had a reaction to. And I'm just anticipating that I don't know what they're going to say, and I think that's great.
That's beautiful.
I think there's going to be a myriad of things that people come away with from it, and that is awesome. I don't think they'll be rooting for any one person, which I think is awesome. I don't think they're going to walk away hating anyone, which I think is awesome. I think they will appreciate the work that's been done, which I think is awesome. And I'm ready for people to see it. I'm ready to hear what people think about it. And I've made a point to try to reach out to people who I think need to see it and probably think, oh, theater, we just play, what kind of stories are they telling out there? And I'll just
buckle up.
Your story. Come see your story at the Actors Warehouse, because I promise you, you're going to see your mom, your aunt, your uncle, your brother, your cousin, your sister, your coworker. You'll see somebody in it if you don't see yourself.
Oof. Come see your story at the Actors Warehouse. I think Stephen would be very happy with that.
I should copyright that.
Yeah, you should copyright that. Well, Amanda Edwards, who plays Naya in the Actors Warehouse production of Pipeline by Dominique Morisseau, and Kinabru, the consulting scholar for the American Black Experience Project, funded by the Florida Humanities Council, and me. I thank all of you for this wonderful exchange. This is going to be really something. And I'm excited to do all the community engagement work that we're doing around it. So, come out and see the show, and then give us your expression. All right, thank you guys.